As soon as I realized this guy's not kidding, I'm like, who's your co-driver? So I was 11 years old when the Cannonball Run movie came out. I heard all my friends talking about this really cool movie, and so a buddy of mine and I, we got on our bicycles and rode to the movie theater, and we're sitting there, and you hear this engine whining on the black screen, and all of a sudden it fades in to this Lamborghini Countach out in the desert, and literally my skin had goosebumps. It was the most amazing moment I'd ever seen in a movie at all, and that was really the first time that I really think I became a car guy. So the movie itself was great, loved it. I love the whole idea of the race across the country. And you know, after the Cannonball thing died down, that was what it was. So years later, I'm reading Wired magazine, and I see this story about a guy who prepped a BMW with all the technology and went out and set the record again. And this really captivated and resonated with me on a number of levels, as myself being a car guy, an engineer, and loving to solve problems. It just sounded like such an amazing endeavor. And really that thought just kind of sat with me and didn't think much about it. So a few years passed, and I got to a point in my career where I could maybe start living out some of my car fantasies that I had from being a little kid. And what was the first memory that I ever had that absolutely ignited the entire thing for me was a black Lamborghini. So I went to Motor Cars of Georgia, and I gotten to know Ed Bolian, who was the sales director there for a while, and started talking about what it would take to actually get a Lamborghini. And I started looking at some very a lot older models at the time, and I committed to this one particular car, and I came back in, and it just happened that they had picked up a press vehicle from Lamborghini, and I think that's probably another story, but I ended up driving away that evening in a black Lamborghini with a wing, very much of a homage to that Lamborghini Countach in Cannonball Run. So spring forward, and I see another article about this movie that's being released called 32 Hours, 7 Minutes. And it documents not only the Alex Roy record run, but also showed a lot of footage of the actual runs back in the 70s and late 80s, especially during the US Express, which was the follow-on event to the Cannonball Run. And the 32 hours and 7 minute record was established by Dave Deem and Doug Turner in a Ferrari 308, and that record had stood until 2006, until Alex Roy actually broke this. And so this documentary, again, reignited this sense of adventure in me, and I realized at that point that as much as I love cars themselves, I also love driving, and I love adventure. So I went back to the dealership, and I knew that Ed Bolian had some experience with rallies at the time. And I went to him and I said, hey, what would it take to actually stage some sort of a record run, maybe from Seattle to Key West or some other type of rally? And Ed at that point advised, you know, that's a really terrible idea to try to be the organizer of something like that in this litigious culture that we're in today. A little disappointed at this point, he took me aside and almost away from the other people in the dealership, and I wasn't really sure what was about to happen, and he said, I'm going to break the Cannonball record. I'm like, and I just got done watching this movie about what Alex Roy did to actually break this record, and I'm like, bullshit, there's no way you're gonna break that record, it's already been done. And he's like, no, I've got a car, it's being prepped, it's, you know, I'm doing a CL55 AMG, and it's right now getting all the electronics installed. And at this point, I started to believe him a little bit. And as soon as I realized this guy's not kidding, I'm like, who's your co-driver? So at that point, you know, and unfortunately, he gave me the bad news. Dropped the bomb on my dream. He said, well, I've been planning this for 5 years. I've got a co-driver. We've been working through this whole thing. But what I really need is someone to go out onto the interstates and do some spotting for me so that we can get ourselves out of the New York area quickly and So I immediately volunteered to be a part of this because it just sounded amazing and it would make for a great story. So, you know, there was minor discussion about it. I was sworn to secrecy at the time. I think I mentioned it to my wife once. So 6 months later, I get a phone call one afternoon. I think it was on a Wednesday maybe, and it's Ed. And he said, "This is the weekend I'm going to go set the record." And so I immediately said, "Well, where do you need me?" I was willing at that point to pick up a plane ticket and go fly to wherever he wanted me to go and help him out. And he said, "Well, actually, I don't need you to spot, I need you to drive." I'm like, wow, yes, okay. And then at this point, Ed said, "Well, you might want to talk to your wife about this and see if it's okay." And I said, "Oh, right, of course." But I talked to her, and she had known me, she and I had known each other at the time the movie came out. I mean, we've been childhood friends. And so she said, "You know, as long as I've known you, I knew this was something that you've always wanted to do. So you should do it." And I said, "You know, I could get arrested. You know, I don't think we'll get hurt, but you know, there's always that possibility. We'll make sure we don't do anything too crazy, but I think, you know, it'll make a good story at the very least." 2 days later, we got in this car, 3 of us, and we drove up to New York City, and the rest is history. So, and I guess that's how I became the co-driver of the current Cannonball record at 28 hours and 50 minutes from New York to LA.